So again, welcome to everyone. Thank you for joining us for part two of Reimagining Schools, Serving Newcomers, Building Belonging, and Activating Community. My name is Anthony Salas, and I am the Events Director with Welcoming America. Before we get started, I want to go over just a few quick housekeeping items with you. The webinar is being recorded, and we'll be sharing it out in the next few days along with any resources that are presented during the presentation. So we'll look for that coming your way. In an effort to provide a secure and welcoming environment for all of you attending today, any AI bots that do come in to record the session will be removed. Again, we are recording this for you, so we will provide that. So we will remove the AI bots that come in there if any do come in. Couple of features for you to be aware of. The chat box is available for you. If you need to communicate, we ask that you try to use the chat mostly for any technical assistance you might need with the Zoom platform. We'll be watching that carefully. If you have content questions as the presentation goes on, please use the Q&A feature. We will be watching that carefully and tracking that and have those questions ready for the Q&A that we'll host at the end of the presentation. So again, please note those two areas. For those of you that may not be familiar with Welcoming America, I want to spend just a few moments and give you a little bit of history on us. We are a national nonprofit organization. Our goal is to lead a movement of inclusive communities and support them in working toward establishing welcoming communities to everyone and making sure that they feel that they belong and that they are valued contributors to those communities. We do have a member network of a little over 300 organizations, nonprofits, governments across the country. And those members do get a number of benefits such as expert coaching, strategic planning, also access to a lot of our member-only events, such as our annual conference, the Welcoming Interactive, and a lot of resources like this webinar that you are attending here today. So if you would like to learn more about our organization, I encourage you to go to welcomingamerica.org and read all about us. So again, I want to move right into the content today because I know there's a lot of good information to be shared. And so with that, I am going to turn it over to Amisha Lamb-Bell. She is the program director with Reimagining Migration. She led our first webinar in the series. And if you all were on that one, it was a great presentation and I'm anticipating another one today. So with that, Misha, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And thank you for the amazing introduction. I want to kick us off here. We're actually going to be with some amazing other co-speakers today, one of which is Adam Strom, who is the Executive Director of Reimagining Migration, whom I'm about to pass it to very shortly, and then Superintendent Priya, who will be here for a really exciting Q&A section. So thank you again for all being here today. I'm really appreciative of your time. And so quickly to pass it off to Adam.
So thanks, Misha. And I'm really, really, really looking forward to engaging with all of you, if not necessarily during the webinar afterwards. And I'm also just want to say shout out to some real lovely friends who are joining us. It makes me smile that y'all are here. So one of the things about Welcoming America's programming is that their work is really built around a welcoming standard. And it's important as you think about, these welcoming standards that are really talking about different aspects of kind of the civic life of a community. It's important to look at the standard around education. I didn't pull up the bullet points, but I did want to pull up the spirit, right? The statement up top. And so this is their statement. And I want you to listen to this, thinking about what is your role in helping make this happen. Because really what Misha is going to be doing today is kind of driving you through a reflection on what you can actually do in a very practical, very, very practical way of making this happen. So, education. In welcoming communities, the education system ensures that all students, including immigrant students, have the support they need to thrive in school and the knowledge they need to succeed in the workplace. Schools and community education programs are informed by the needs and priorities of immigrant students and their families and are accessible to all residents, including immigrants. Welcoming and inclusion efforts are not siloed within a single school or program, but incorporated into the schools and school districts that serve the community. So take a moment, kind of reflect on that. I, for what it's worth, I'd like to highlight a couple things here. That the educational programming is informed by the needs and priorities of immigrant students and families. So if you're in those categories, how is that happening? And I also want you to think about, what does it mean that the inclusion efforts are not siloed within a school or program, but incorporated into the schools and school districts that serve the community? That's where I'll stop.
Thank you so much. And yes, let's hold on to those prime main words that Adam pulled out for us. Now, I want us to very quickly just go over the agenda for today and also recommend that perhaps you have a notebook or journal available if you want to jot down your thoughts. And really beginning with imagination as our civic duty, that imagining a world where everyone is welcome, everyone belongs, and our needs are met is our civic duty to ourselves, to our young people, and to our elders, and really just holding the power of what that imagination can look like. Next, we'll dive into a little bit about belonging and schools. This is just going to be a really quick recap for the previous presentation. So if you were with us last time, you'll hear a little bit of the same information. Otherwise, those who might be just joining, really just a primer for the tools in which we're using or creating to build these worlds. And so we have community belonging tools, student tools, and teaching tools. And so for those of us who are educators, really having those teaching tools, if perhaps you are not an educator, these are just some of the tools that we're creating to be resources for y'all. And everything is on our website under a free login. And what we really do with these materials is that they are in pilot form. So any feedback that you have, things you want to see, questions, comments, like those things all get incorporated. You can reach out to us. And again, all of these things are living documents, and the tools we create are made and intended to serve you all. So again, as you're using these and having questions or comments, please reach out to us. They get incorporated. That is the work that we're doing in collaboration with you all. And then we're going to end with action plan examples. And so just a few of the things that other folks have done as ways of embodying some of these tools before we get to the fantastic piece, which is Q&A with our superintendent Priya here. And so really asking some of those questions that those of us who perhaps sit outside of the schools would love to have answered by our superintendent guest. And so very quickly, I want us to really pause in the moment that we were in. This is where we started last session, and thinking about, one, the conversation that is surrounding young individuals now, especially newcomer and immigrant origin individuals, and recognizing the ways in which the divisive political language does not stay within adult spheres and translates directly into the classroom, and how some of this fear and othering and anxiety is also on top of a loneliness epidemic in our communities, but also in our schools. And then also the finding that we highlighted last week in that newcomer and immigrant origin students often report showing up extremely excited to be in school, to learn, to make a friend, to belong in a new environment. And then that sense of belonging is seen to decrease year after year that they are in the US school systems. And so we see all of these things as, yes, alarm bells, but alarm bells to say, okay, this is an opportunity to reimagine the way that we are serving all of our students and really think, what does it actually mean to serve every single student? And what would it mean for every student to truly feel like they belong? And again, so really thinking about how by focusing in on the experiences of our newcomer and immigrant origin students, they're highlighting for us this need to reimagine what it would mean to serve every single student. And so when we're thinking about belonging, we have the question of what is belonging? And I know this can be a really challenging question that we come back to all the time, especially for those who maybe have always felt like they belonged in their community, or those who are really wrestling with what it means to realize that perhaps they have been made to feel like they don't belong. And that can be a really challenging process. And so the answer that we found thus far to belonging is to belong is to be embraced. It is a feeling of safety, support, celebration, and civic agency within a community. And we do want to highlight that piece, and we'll come back to, but that civic agency piece of saying, oh, I take ownership over improving the things we need to see in our community. I feel like I'm a valuable voice in terms of creating a welcoming space, and that I can contribute as someone with community values. And so we have put together this belonging brief. It will be one of the resources that we send out. But what we wanted to say is, what could belonging look like in schools? So we have this research, we have this brief in which we've found that the benefits of belonging, the brain science, all of the positive things of cohesion and identity development that come when a sense of belonging is created, they don't just happen. It is a result of deliberate policies and practices. But then when we zoom out as to what it would actually look like for there to be deliberate policies and practices, it asks the question, what could belonging look like in schools for a community at large, especially as we are recognizing that, again, our young people do not exist in a siloed world from the adults and the communities around them. The things that they hear, the things that they see, the way adults model behavior, those things get directly translated into the classroom. And so, as we mentioned last time, what would it be like to be a fourth grader, new to your town, to look at your parents and see them feel really excited and welcomed to be on a school campus, that they look forward to signing you up for classes, and that they are made to feel as if the school is a place for themselves to access resources as well. Or what it would look like to be a teenager who's perhaps done with school, but also figuring out, 1920, what are those next steps look like? Maybe they didn't choose college, and so they're in the town. How can they continue to see school as a place for lifelong learning? Or perhaps young mothers who need, information on what it means to be a young mother. How could we integrate the elderly community members and value their information as well? And so how are we uplifting our elders and having them see schools as touch points, and really just recognizing that we are all going to be in very different parts of our life, but how can the school be there no matter what choices we make or what we want to learn, to be a site for lifelong learning and community building? And so just really thinking about taking a moment to say, how could a variety of different people with totally different touch points to a school system still feel like they belong there? I think the question can often be also like, why schools? Why is school the place that we're trying to figure out how to make consistent touch points for community? And one, it's because this is where young people are learning how to be community members. They're learning how to build community, how to make friends, lasting, healthy relationships, how to show up when someone needs support. And so this is really where they're learning how to be the community members. But also, schools already have a lot of community hub infrastructure. So thinking about kitchens that can serve a variety of different people, spaces that can house folks, rooms that are not used when students are not in the building, and then ideally, and then most importantly, access to public transportation. And just really thinking about how we can already use the resources that we have, so that way we can focus on those that we need. And so the reason why we wanted to bring schools up here as community centers, again, is really thinking about all of the things that we're already asking schools to do. And so that way we can touch and support them in doing this work. And so a few things that we're thinking about is, we already know that schools are expected to serve the academic, social, and physical education needs of our young people or their human development. But they're also asked to fulfill the role of civic services, whether it's disaster shelters, sometimes they're voting locations or workforce development. Sometimes they do have the performances in the games and cultural events, and sometimes they're serving the mental health resources, physical doctors, dentists, check-ins, holding physical health records for young people. So we're already asking schools to do all of these things, but what we're really hoping to inspire in this moment of imagination is what it would look like, as we started last week, to really support our schools and each of these pieces. What vision we could bring if we think about how ourselves, our family members, our neighbors, the organizations we work for, or our affiliations and volunteer groups, what would it look like if we all came together to build a world where schools are supported as the soul of your community, where lifelong learning and connection thrives, and where every human from any walk of life at any time can go and be welcomed and really feel as though the community is invested in their lifelong learning. And so this is kind of the core of what we kicked off with last time, but it's important to ground ourselves in the power of this imagination and why it is that we do what we do, that we recognize the systems that are already in place and how we can come together to, again, make the world a center of belonging within our schools. And so what we asked you to do at the end of last session is to perhaps complete this identity engagement with the ecology of identity. And the reason why this is often a first step is sometimes, again, it's necessary to take a step back and think about all of the different roles that our identity have shaped ourselves, how we think about the world, who we build easy kinship with, who perhaps takes us a little bit longer to know, to understand, to work with, and really thinking about how some of those ideas are, again, shaped by different pieces of our identity, and how by uncovering those, we can find different ways to connect. We can find ways to build bridges and recognize similarities and value and cherish differences in one another. And so again, we're just starting with this ecology of identity to also help us position ourselves within our own senses of belonging, perhaps how that changes based on the different spaces that we are in our communities. And so I want us to pause there just so you can see it on the screen, perhaps jot down any piece of this you're thinking, oh, this is something that I maybe hadn't thought about in relevance to my identity, and I want to really think about it a little bit before we dive into our community tools, which I am going to do right now. And so some of the things that we make are, again, student-facing, teacher-facing, but these specifically are some of the community tools that we have. And so something that we are launching right now is a community evaluation audit. And so one of the pieces of this is to ask you to evaluate the youth spaces in your town or community and really think, okay, if I'm showing up to these spaces that I think are where young people are able to gather and build community, to what extent does it check off some of this criteria? Is it open to all identities? Is it free or low cost? Are there no prerequisites for entering? Is it physically accessible? Are there reachable transportation options? Could a student, take safe public transportation to the location and back, and their parent be like, okay, this is something that I feel comfortable sending my child to do for them to go and make friends? Or does it require public transportation? Or sorry, private transportation? Is it safe for all, right? Are there systems in place for students to navigate and learn how to approach conflict in a healthy way, right? Are there trusted adults on site? And what is the process for having adults be trained on the ways in which they're going to respond to conflict? Are there enriching learning environments for our young people? And so there's a variety of different ways in which things might be enriching. And so something that you might find in a checklist like this is like, okay, hey, we seem to have a lot of enriching activities around art and physical education, but not too many with an opportunity for young people to build community with one another who are outside of these interests. Or perhaps we don't have a ton of opportunities for our young people to develop new life skills or to be leaders. And then maybe if we have those things, they're not accessible by any form of public transportation. So you would have to have a public ride there, or there's a prerequisite of that you had to take this class the year before or have lived in this area the year before to be able to do this. And so these are just to say, these are things to consider. It's not to say that a prerequisite is necessarily bad if it's, how to weave, level 2. But it is to say that if everything you need has to have prerequisites, how could a newcomer student access this? And so these are things to just consider when you're doing an evaluation of your space. The next thing we have here as a tool is our newcomer kit. And again, these are living documents. The newcomer kit, we're continuously updating. Some of the things it has here is on different laws, on the rights that students have to resources. A few other things is directly from certain schools on how to navigate teacher conferences, how to prepare students to advocate for the different levels of scaffolding they might need. And so even if you do not have a young person who is in school, this can be a fantastic research just to read a little bit about some of the information that's available in terms of perhaps supporting a neighbor or perhaps supporting a new coworker, and just us all being fluid in terms of the rights and the ways that we can support our young people is only going to create a stronger system. And so that is just some of the things that we have in terms of these community tools. And the goal really here is to be able to have resources that empower us to go out into our communities, do an assessment, share our findings with one another. Perhaps there's going to be things that we all find similar or different than what we're seeing, but to really be able to use this as a conversation starter to build action plans, to say, okay, based on what we've found, how are we going to do one thing by the end of next week or the end of the month to increase the sense of belonging for all people in our community? And I will get a little bit more into that later, but I also wanted to highlight some of the student-facing resources that we have. And so these are two new things that we're piloting, one being a student culture audit. And so this is a document intended to allow young people to walk around their schools and really reflect on the spaces and how they feel in them, how others feel in them, perhaps what they're learning. Is it representative of their identities? Do they feel seen and supported? What does it feel like to have a new student in the school? How does the school community rally around them and support them? And using kind of that experience as an indicator of what belonging looks like for everyone. To say, okay, if we're in a space where like a new student can immediately come in and be offered opportunity to make friends, to be in community, to have their voice heard, that's a pretty good indicator of how all of the students are feeling. Right? If someone just new could feel those things, that's a pretty good indicator that there has been a culture of welcoming and belonging for all students. And then this is, ideally, again, provide students the tools with which to have conversations with each other, to reflect, and to once again build an action plan on how they could, again, by the end of the week or the quarter, do one thing that makes another student feel like they belong in their school or makes another group feel like they belong in school. And so with that, we've also put together a pilot belonging alliance club with directions. And so while this is a little bit more direction oriented than a lot of our materials, which we like to be a little bit more open-ended, this is a tool designed to help students build an alliance club. And so they can approach it from any level, use any of the things they want, not use any of the things they want. Again, speaking to you all, if you have a young person who you think would be really excited to pilot something like this, or you're a teacher who you're like, oh, I think I know a group of kids who would love to be in a belonging alliance club, something they can do is complete a school audit as a club and then work together to think about what is our school action plan to really be able to, again, foster a sense of belonging in our school and on our campuses. Other teaching tools we have, because I do know that we have some educators in the audience, we have a history curriculum and reflection sheet, but we also have an ELA tool that we're piloting. And so we have a variety of different touch points from teachers depending on what you teach. We have the culturally responsive checklist that allows you to just really do an audit of your practice as an educator. With the ELA one in its pilot phase, right now the goal is to be able to pull out and understand migration and belonging no matter what text you're teaching. So perhaps you have been given a mandated set of texts. How can you see and understand that human migration and the strive for belonging is a consistent theme in almost every text that we read? And then this other piece that we've added to as a part of first, you have that community audit, the student audit, and then this is a very specific learning environment audit for educators to be able to take a moment and do a deep dive on an individual student, again, by focusing on one, really illuminating what we think we know about all, a whole class observation, and then a whole school community question. And so again, each of these questions are tailored very specifically, but they're really designed to help educators create curriculum that reflects these stories of migration and reduces the sense of like myths or falsehoods that are taught and told. And so both having students be able to see themselves in their curriculum, but also really reflecting on to what extent are you teaching narratives that allow every student to feel like they belong, that they have an access point, that people like them have had really beautiful impacts on the history of what it means to be a human. And then when we're thinking about how we can turn this material into schools where there is a greater sense of belonging that then exists beyond and out into the community, we're really thinking about we are educating young people who are going to be the leaders of our community. And so how can creating just such a safe and welcoming environment from a young age through school and having everyone have these consistent touch points in school can help to foster broader community relationships with one another. And so what we have here is at the end of all of our tools, there is this opportunity to engage in an action plan. And so, as I said here, this very much so, unlike the Student Alliance Club, is much less directive as to what to do next. Our action plans really ask you to say, okay, what is your driving question? What do you want to see? Who are you trying to create something for? What is it that you will do? What will you change and why? Where are you going to start? And so it's these prompting questions for you to build an action plan that is relevant and specific to you and your community's needs. And so there is no one right way to do it. I'm going to give a few examples on the next slide, but again, there is, yeah, a fantastic Q&A. There is no one right way to build an action plan. The best way is to do it in community. It's to find a few people, to build a group, to build a community organization that is actively working on fostering belonging, especially for our newcomer and immigrant origin individuals. But there is no one right way to build an action plan towards belonging. These are two questions that we had, again, in last webinar that we're pulling into here that could perhaps help you consider what you might want to do, which is how are you, your family, your neighbors, and your organizations or affiliations engaging with schools now? What does that look like? What are your touch points to schools? Where are things that you could perhaps volunteer, support with, as you'll see when we're going to speak to our superintendents later, but really a way to support a school is to kind of approach them with a plan. And so really thinking about what that can look like. And then looking around and saying, how often are young people elevated as community leaders? And how often is their voice incorporated in terms of their experience? And so I'm actually just going to put this on the slide for 1 minute. And then I'm going to give you a few examples of other action plans. And again, I just want to put this on the slide for 1 minute. So perhaps you have some brainstorms that you want to jot down. So I'm going to put on 1 minute starting now. And again, a really good brainstorming question is just like, what is your driving idea or question? Feel free to take either of these two or to jot down another one that you come up with. About 20 more seconds. Okay, I'll bring us back together in 3, 2, 1. Now, one example of an action plan here is one of our Reimagining Migration ambassadors, Sandy Mendoza's International Cafe. And here she has some of her newcomer and immigrant origin students be the greeters for their school, in which they speak out and share in their own language. The greeting that is, their traditional way of welcoming somebody. And so through this, as just a very quick aside, not only is she elevating her newcomer and immigrant origin students, but she gave them a club and a space to be in community with one another, but also, again, as their greeters, they are the ones offering welcoming. And so it really is just a reminder of how beautiful and powerful it does feel to be someone who opens up that welcoming and to be the one to say, oh, hello, good morning, you are safe here with me. And really giving, again, those newcomer students an opportunity to take on that leadership role, to be the greeters themselves, and to do so in a way that represents their languages. Students who are entering were hearing some of the things that they'd heard growing up. And so she really created this beautiful space, and they continue to do this. And again, it's just a way to think about how are we elevating young people as community leaders? What are the skill sets that really foster strong community development? One of them being able to welcome, being able to extend that branch of saying, again, you are safe here in this community with me.
And Misha, I'll just add that, what Sandy did with these kids is they found out, they said, how many languages are spoken in our school, right? So they had to do some research. And then once they did that research, they're like, okay, so how do I say welcome? Right? And
Absolutely.
they went and learn that. And it's become such a ritual that this now happens monthly. And then they have like these there's a school system with the technology infrastructure. So they have little video broadcasts that the kids lead now. So these kids are now like the cool kids in the school. And it started with these are the kids who all sat in the cafeteria feeling pretty isolated.
Absolutely. And I think that ties in really beautifully into the highlight of Marie's work that we discussed last week, where she identifies the first thing that you do is an evaluation of your community. And so exactly as Sandy did when doing the surveys of the different languages, it's really understanding the needs. And I also just wanted to highlight Marie in action. She was one of our principals from last week who shared the work that she's done in terms of supporting her communities and really thinking about some of the ways in which she's incorporated family members, where she's helped find them jobs, where she organizes initiatives for feeding families in South Florida, in which the students are the volunteers, but then also really thinking about how that's teaching them those community member skills. And so thinking about, again, how we can have these schools and teaching young people what it means like to be community leaders as hubs. Then I'll pass this off to Adam for 2 others examples.
Yeah, I mean, just give a sense of like how, reinforcing what was going on in the schools. Sometimes the local museums are really excited and they're looking for opportunities to tell a story. So the Museum of Fine Arts and the Institute of Contemporary Art in Boston have both had tie-in exhibits to stories about migration, recognizing that this is an opportunity to get to know the schools better, actually, and bring in young people. So the MFA is, we're in discussion with them about creating a migration film series in the spring. The Institute of Contemporary Art here in Boston, actually, it's a very good example. They created this really brilliant show on contemporary artists reflecting on migration. And then somebody from the community, y'all, said to the museum, guess what? Great show. The art that's in this show does not reflect the members of our community. Do something about it. And the institution responded. So, think about how do you build those relationships where there's a chance for some constructive dialogue. How do you speak back to the school in a way that you're going to be heard, to the museum, to the public library in a way that you're going to be heard and engaged with. So that's one piece of this. And let's go to the next. So that's one way of engaging. And just another is, I don't know how many of you have local historical societies or local museums, but we've done this really, actually, I haven't led it. My colleague Veronica Boyes-Mancia led this wonderful partnership with the Smithsonian. They, like a lot of museums, have a ton of digital collection, but digital resources about migration, but nobody's really kind of curated them. So we worked with the local institutions, maybe this is what your group does, and created these educational pathways that then schools could use through these collections. They now have 29 resource collections that do things like, introduce multicultural stories. So the next slide is about a book I think that I met Priya about 7 years ago when she speaks, and I think I used this in one of the very first workshops I led for the team at the BBS. This book, The Name Jar, and it really opened up. And this is an activity that's actually meant to work from the classroom to actually getting student and parent conversations about names and identity. So that's a couple. Those are a couple examples of, the Smithsonian's a big deal, but the local folks want to do this too because they want to be relevant. They know that they need to be engaged with the changing community. So build those bridges and then think about how you can connect them back to the school. I'll be quiet. You're muted, Misha.
Nice. I was just going to say thank you so much. Those are just a few different examples of some of the types of action plans that people can engage in. And again, we will circle back to that after we have this fantastic opportunity to engage in a Q&A with Superintendent Priya, who I'm really excited to be able to pass this over for her to be able to introduce herself and put 1 to 2 sentences about what really brings her to this work, what excites her, and kind of why we are absolutely so phenomenally lucky to have her in the room, in the Zoom room with us today.
Hi, everyone, and thank you guys so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here. So I am a superintendent, and I started off as a classroom teacher for 15 years before entering school and then district administration. And what keeps me passionate about this work is that I myself was an English learner, and I was a child of immigrants. And so when I look out at our students and I recognize or see myself in them and the experiences that they're going through as they enter into this new world, as they, even after they've been here for a few years, as they're straddling these two worlds because they are going home to a culture and a community a language and food that's different than what they're experiencing at school. And so, I remember what it was like growing up and needing that support from my teachers, being that support for my parents who were also going through that kind of transition. And so I appreciate the school so much and all that they do for our students, but also our families, and making sure that they are welcome here.
Thank you so much. And again, it is just such a joy to have you in this room with us. I am so grateful. So kind of to build off of what you were just saying, I would love to hear, what are you hearing about the impact of potential political environment and divisive language on your teachers, your students, and their families?
So, there's a lot of uncertainty right now, I think, and it is a little bit nostalgic from several years ago when I was an assistant superintendent overseeing an office of English learners in another urban district. And so I think right now everybody's kind of waiting, watching, trying to see what's going to happen. And how it's going to directly impact them. So I think that, everyone's just a little uncertain right now. That being said, then there's always, even in the last many years, there's always been rhetoric. There are anti-immigrant sentiments that are out there. And we are, as a school system, trying our best to respond to them. Most recently, we actually had one of our Haitian community-based organizations come to us about how their community was feeling about some recent comments that had been made. And then how those comments were, parroted in school by students who may have heard them. And so I think it's important to remember that, like you said, that, the narrative, our students are hearing it, but they're not just hearing it out there, they're hearing it in their schools where it is being, said back to them. Students are learning, they're taking in all of this information, and it may not be poorly intended, but they're hearing it everywhere. And so the community-based organization wanted to partner with us on how we can specifically address these comments that were made and how our students are feeling right now, and then how our school community is addressing our students. And this means dialoguing not only with our Haitian students, but dialoguing with our school leaders, our educators, and then other students, on making sure that we are staying true to our mission, which is to support all students and to create a safe and welcoming environment for everyone. And so, to answer your question, I think the impact is ongoing. There's always an impact because these conversations are always happening. So it's just about making sure that we as educators are available to, if it's a counter narrative that's needed, if it's a training that's needed, if it's resources that are needed, that we're there to be able to provide.
Thank you so much. You already started to name, I think, some of the resources of what could be provided. And so then thinking about also all the people who are in the room here to support, what are some of the biggest challenges that you have supporting newcomer students, immigrant origin students, and their families?
Well, I think right now, what we're seeing in a lot of urban districts especially is larger enrollment numbers throughout the school year. It used to be more predictable, and it used to be at isolated times throughout the school year. It was at the beginning of the school year in January, but now the last couple of years we've been seeing a steady increase in enrollment all throughout the months of the school year. And so one of the things that we, have challenges with is even the infrastructure that we have, the things that we've worked on in order to support our newcomer families and our students. Maybe they're not up to scale in the way that they need to be. And so we're really trying to scale those resources. And we do have a lot of partnerships with organizations, with, different even community members who are trying to support us in this work. And all of those count more than ever right now, as again, we're trying to provide as much support as we can from the school. But we know that we need to be able to access wraparound services from others, that we need to be able to connect our families with, their own communities, with places where they definitely feel safe and welcome, that with folks who, actually speak their native language and can help them navigate the system. Because I think a lot of the things, as I said, that we've built in place over time, it's just not enough right now. And so I think that we're doing our best to scale our efforts. And so every bit of help that we get externally, every partnership, every other organization that can partner with us to do that is that much more critical right now.
Absolutely. And as you're talking about partnering, especially with other organizations, how can, perhaps for the people in this webinar, how can community members or members of the community help you navigate these challenges and build belonging? What are some things you would like to see? What is the best way to support you without, perhaps inundating you? How can we be of service to you?
So I love some of the ideas that you all had presented. And I think what really resonates with me is as either individuals or as organizations, if you want to help, if you identify not only what is your true passion in this work, but also what is the skill set you bring, what is the support you can provide, and if you can organize around that with others, and then be able to present a plan or proposal that could support the schools, I think that's wonderful. Sometimes if you identify what it is that you have to offer, there are already organizations that exist that you could then piggyback onto, or you could volunteer with that are already doing the work. But if you don't, to be able to create something new, to create a new initiative, a new project that then you can provide to the school system. So one example is, we had some graduates who had identified that one of the things they needed, they were newcomers into the country, and they were able to go off to college, and then they were in the working world and recognized the amount of networks that some of those who've been born here, some of the connections that already, pre-existed some of their colleagues, like they already had these kind of networks built in to help them get jobs, to help them, connect them with employment opportunities. And so this group of students actually, or former students, actually organized and said, you know what, we want to be those networks for our students. We want to go back to our high school and be able to provide that. So what they did is they created a mentorship program, and then they started getting applications from business owners, from anybody who lived in the community who was going to be able to support students at the high school, so that they would have a network when they got out of school, so that they would have these connections. And that was something I had never really thought about. And these students had identified it because of the experience that they had had where they got out of college, and they're like, wow, all of these people are already set up with jobs, or they know this person who knows this person. And when you're new to this country, you don't necessarily have that kind of community already built in. So what I really appreciated about them is they had kind of identified a need, they identified a plan, they came and said, we want to do this, can we work together to do it? And it took some time, because of course then we had to figure out, all right, what were the liabilities? We had to figure out a process that it was approved by the school committee. But that was work worth doing, because they had already done so much of the work already that it was like they were providing a plan and a solution. And all we needed to do was just make it work.
Thank you so much. That was so comprehensive, especially for those of us who are sitting here hearing that maybe our wheels are already turning as to what we could potentially do. I do want to ask you, what, if any, are types of unhelpful behaviors from community members within relationships to schools and school districts?
Well, I guess it's the opposite end of that, right? I mean, I always love to get emails, and I know principals do too, from individuals who are like, hey, I want to volunteer. Hey, I want to help. I mean, that's always a nice thing to hear. But I think that on our end, then we're left with the question of, okay, I need to think of how. I need to think of where the need is. I need to think of what we can do, or what can I connect them with. And so that's why I think it's actually really helpful when groups are already kind of organized, have a plan, and just need help bringing it into the school system, or bringing the school system out to them. That is particularly helpful, because I think when we get offers of support, I mean, it feels wonderful, but then it's about, okay, where do I place it? Where do I plug it? And so when that's kind of already done for us, I think it does make it that much easier, because I loved the chart that you presented about what are schools expected to do. And we've got a lot going on, and all of it is important work that we want to do. And we need help doing it. So you don't want to turn away somebody who's asking to volunteer. At the same time, it's hard, in my role, for example, to identify where is the area that they can best support. So I think to come with kind of a plan, an initiative, already, half baked is really helpful to us.
Priya, when we spoke yesterday, you talked a little bit about engaging with the school committee.
Yes, I think another one of the things that I would definitely recommend is, if you're unsure where where you could support, I think it's also great to reach out to your school committee members. They're elected officials. They always want to hear from their constituents, but they have an idea of what the school district is doing well and what the school district is lacking. My school committee members can give you a very comprehensive rundown of what we need to work on. And so if you connect with your school committee members, you can figure out, okay, what are the supports that our school district does desperately need? And so how can I help fill that gap?
Thank you so much. And then lastly, what is one thing community members could start doing tomorrow to build towards a vision where schools are these hubs of community?
I think start thinking about what it is that you can do to serve, and how you can start to organize a group or join a group that already exists in order to be able to provide that support. I think also watching your school committee meetings, watching even city council meetings, or just being aware of what's going on in your community, I think is really important. Because we do know that there are certain narratives out there. There are certain conversations happening. And I think, Adam, you brought it up really well. Sometimes we'll have all of these people coming to public comment to say a thing, and we need people to come and say the other thing, right? And so oftentimes those voices that are coming out aren't always representative of everybody. But if they're the voices that are coming out, they're the ones we're listening to. So, and they're the ones we have to respond to. So being aware of what that conversation is, what those community members are working towards, and either getting on board or coming out and making sure that you're providing an alternate perspective, I think is really important. Because I think sometimes we have we need to fill the silence. It's not that people aren't thinking it, but if people aren't and hoping for it, but if people aren't coming out and saying it, then it makes it that much more difficult for us as school leaders and district leaders, for us to be able to have the data to prove that this is what's right for kids, and this is what's right for our newcomers and our immigrant students. So just stay tuned and use your voice.
Thank you so much. Adam, did you have another question you wanted to ask?
No, I did see one in the Q&A, which I thought was interesting and important. So somebody in the Q&A picked up on the notion that there's a line in the Welcoming America standard that talks about avoiding silos in a school or a program. So from an educational perspective, can you talk about what that means, and when is segregation or separation helpful? When is it useful to bring people together, right? So.
Yes. So I think that, we do need to get away from the silos, and we need to make sure that we're focused around this mission and this vision of creating a safe and welcoming environment, and making sure that all of our students feel a sense of belonging. And I think that, you guys were talking a lot about just the environment, and looking at curriculum. And I think, we're sending cues all day to our students and to our families about what that environment is, and who is welcome, who belongs, and we need to be more cohesive in that work or that message doesn't just belong to one department. It doesn't belong to the multilingual learners department. It belongs to everybody. And I think there are so many ways to make sure that it becomes part of the school culture and the district culture. And even moves such as, I was talking yesterday about having paraprofessionals, translation paras, right? That was a job that we had in one of my districts, and then we transitioned to family liaisons, and really expanded that role to ensure that we had these members of our school staff that were multilingual, that were part of the community, that had that cultural background and those assets to be able to really connect with our families beyond just providing translation. And again, I think those are the shifts that we need to make about making it this kind of add-on that we invite to an IEP meeting versus part of the culture when, the family liaison or liaisons are part of the staff and they are part of the workings of the school. And so moving from kind of even not just the silos, but the mindsets to make sure it is something that is integrated in every part of what you're doing, from your mission and your vision to your strategic plan, I think is really important. I don't know if that answered the question.
No, I think that's part of the story. And then the other question, of course, is to say that doesn't mean that anyone suggesting getting rid of the scaffolds that newcomers might need. It's just it's mindset shift.
Absolutely. In fact, I have had said to me before in the past, well, they are all of our students. And that's 100, but almost as like an excuse. And I'm like, that is absolutely true. But when you don't have targeted support, they quickly become nobody's students, so you have to make sure that you are providing the targeted support. And that's for any kind of different learner or different, it's even just part of the schooling experience. It's like saying, oh, they're all of our students, so we don't need grades, we don't need different subjects. No, you need all of these. So I appreciate the distinction between silos and providing targeted support, because I do think that yes, they are all of our students and we all need to be providing that support, but we do need to, all of us as educators, be making sure that we are providing exactly what each student individually needs. Because if we're not doing that, I mean, that's the crux of our work.
Thanks.
Thank you so much, Priya. It's been such a joy to have you here. And thank you, Adam, for bringing in those questions. I know we were going to have you kind of circle back here to have some Q&A for you as well, since you are a head of a nonprofit doing work in communities, and asking you a little bit about what that means. I know we have only about 5 minutes or so to go, so I just want to do a quick plug for our call to action resources, and then I will bring it back to you to end with you. Really here, just wanting to highlight again these action plans and that community audit. Because again, that community audit is intended to be accessible by everyone. There are about 3 sections: this youth belonging space checklist that I mentioned a little bit earlier when we were also talking about students. But then there is also a community and whole town evaluation piece, which is going to ask you on a scale of 1 to 5, really how you're feeling about some of the dynamics within your community. And then there's also a rubric piece for you to go around and really reflect on the experiences in your town. And then the third component is to draw a belonging map. So really to jot down all of the spaces that you're evaluating, and it's going to ask you to use different symbols to identify areas where you feel like you belong, where you don't feel like you belong, where you think youth feel like they belong, areas where youth might need to avoid out of concerns around belonging or safety. And so really just mapping this out, and then ideally also including the access points of public transportation as well, to think about what it would look like to be a young person trying to get around your community, or what it would look like for you yourself to try to make a new friend in your community or town, and to turn that friend into a lifelong community relationship. And so I just wanted to bring both of those things back up here again, and to really highlight each of the questions and the ways in which these things can be played out in our community. And then with the little bit of time we have left, I wanted to, because we did answer some of the Q&A questions already, they were sent, to pass it back off to Adam to close us out.
I can definitely do that. Before I close out, I want to know if Anthony has heard some questions that he wishes that we'd answered.
I think I was looking over the list of questions here, and it looks like you all answered pretty much all of them. So I think we are good for now. So
Excellent. Well, here's the story. I'm going to give out Misha's email. You can email Misha at reimaginingmigration.org. It'll be, the email will be in the follow-up email because I know some people haven't written out Misha before. MEI.
I'll drop it in the chat. I'll drop it in the chat.
Excellent. But here's what I want to say to y'all. So we started here. We started with a vision that Welcoming America offers, right? The education system ensures that all students, including immigrant students, have the support they need to thrive and the knowledge they need to succeed in the workforce. We've tried to give you some tools, right? And we will share all of them in the in the follow-up email. But as educators, as community members, as NGO professionals, y'all have to participate in this conversation. You can't leave this up to just school folks. One of the things that Priya said very well, I think, is that there are a lot of people who get their voice heard on these issues. They're often not necessarily the folks who you want to have their voice heard, because sometimes they're not said with the love and appreciation of our newcomer students and the diversity of our community. Sometimes, not always, sometimes. So we need y'all to offer a vision to help raise us up. Because if you don't say this matters, how is Priya going to be able to get the mayor to understand that these are the kind of programs that she needs to make happen? If all she's hearing is the other side of a conversation, maybe she's being told the town doesn't care about these kids. So, just as we have to combat bigotry the second we hear it, you have to combat the inaction. So I'm turning this over to Anthony, because you're hearing me pleading with y'all to be public voices. So, Mr. Salas.
thank you, Mr. Strom. I appreciate that. And a big thank you to Misha for leading not only this part today, but our first part. I appreciate all of the work that you put into just this entire series, and it was really wonderful. So thank you for that. Priya, thank you as well for joining us today and sharing all of your experience as well. Quickly before we close out, I know we are approaching the top of the hour, but I just want to reiterate some things shared at the beginning. The recording is going to be made available to you all probably in the next few days once we have it ready to go. In addition to the recording of today's presentation, we're also going to include the recording to the first part. So for any of you that missed that, we'll make sure that you have that as well. And then I think Misha entered into the chat. All of the resources that were shared today, we'll be including the links to those as well. So you'll have access to all of it. Again, thank you so much, Adam, Misha, and Priya. Appreciate you today and everything that you've shared. Look forward to working with you all, hopefully going forward and sharing more with everyone here. And thank all of you, our attendees, for joining us today. We know you have very busy schedules, and we appreciate you taking the time to be with us. And hopefully we will see you on an upcoming webinar here soon. Have a great afternoon, everyone, and a great rest of your week. Take care.